שהצטרפתם. תודה רבה שהצטרפתם לערב הנפלא הזה שאליוט סייע לי ובעצם ארגן את כל הערב הזה, אליוט בארי. תודה רבה לך, אליוט. ואני מעביר אליך את שרביט הפיקוד, בבקשה, תעשה כפי שאנחנו תכננו, ושבהצלחה לכולנו.
תודה רבה,
חנוכה
מנחם.
שמח וחודש טוב לכולם.
כן, ערב טוב, חודש טוב, חנוכה שמח to audience in Israel and abroad. I would like to ask the Rav of our community, Mara Da'atra, Rav Ott, to say a few words of greeting, please.
Thank you so much. אז חנוכה שמח לכולם. אז ברשות הקהילה היקרה שלנו, הצבי ישראל, רבנים יקרים, מוריי ורבותיי, אני רואה שנשיא בית הכנסת איתנו, פרופסור אברהם סמסון, ברשות כל המארגנים שארגנו את הערב הנפלא הזה, במיוחד פרופסור אלימלך, אליוט, בארי היקר, על ארגון כזה ערב מיוחד. I'll now switch to English so that everyone may benefit. Welcome, Professor Roger Kornberg. We are truly, truly grateful to you for finding the time to give us a lecture on such an important topic. It's a privilege, a great privilege, to open this special night with a Dvar Torah. Why do we light a Chanukiah that has 8 stems with a 9th for a shamash, and not one that has 7 stems, like the menorah had in the Beit HaMikdash, Shiv'a Kanim? After all, the miracle was performed on that menorah, Shiv'a Kanim, which is the reason we celebrate Chanukah in the first place. According to Chazal, the menorah is a symbol of light and Jewish wisdom, and it has great significance for Am Yisrael, a free nation in Eretz Yisrael. After the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash and the disappearance of the menorah, Chazal prohibited the use and creation of kelim that looked exactly like the kelim used in the Beit HaMikdash, and among them, the 7-stem menorah, HaMenorah Baal Shiv'at HaKanim. The Rishonim and the Poskim brought different reasons for this prohibition. A possible reason perhaps stemmed from fears that desires for new Jewish sovereignty would rise among the people, and that an attempt to realize such aspirations could lead to a dangerous rebellion in the empire. Throughout the years of exile, Galut Am Yisrael did not stray from this prohibition, and therefore the custom became lighting Chanukah candles with a similar yet different type of a lamp, 8 stems and 9 with a shamash, our Chanukiah, Shmona Kanim ve'im shamash Tish'a Kanim. Many years later, Zionists believed that with the establishment of the State of Israel and the renewal of Jewish independence, Atzmaut Am Yisrael, that had been lost for over 2,000 years, it was time to return to the original symbol of a 7-stem menorah, Menorat Shiv'a Kanim. Hence, the menorah with 7 stems was chosen as the symbol of the state of Israel, Semel Medinat Yisrael, and then was later placed in front of the Knesset. Perhaps in this time of Jewish sovereignty, this symbol can be more than just an art piece. Perhaps in the near future, there will be room to change the custom and light Chanukah candles in a 7-stem menorah, Menorat Shiv'a Kanim, velo Menorah Baal Shmona Kanim. Either way, Mechag Chanukah, which is a symbol of hope, renewal, and light, be a sign of positive change. Be'ezrat Hashem, soon we will discover and create a true cure for our world and for our nation as we commemorate the first and hopefully last anniversary of COVID. Chag Sameach Lichulam, Professor Be'eri, bevakasha.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to share my screen and we can begin. So thank you, Rav Od, for your enlightening words on the Festival of Lights. My name is Elliot Berry, and I have the pleasure and honor to host this meeting with our distinguished guest speaker, Nobel laureate and son of a Nobel laureate, Professor Roger Kornberg from Stanford University and the Hebrew University. Rav Professor Avraham Steinberg was also meant to be with us to discuss the ethical dilemmas of prioritizing vaccinations. But unfortunately, in the last few days, he himself has come down with COVID, and we wish him refuah shalema. There are just two organization points I want to make before we start. One, if you have any questions, please can you put them at the bottom in the chat section. And two, please make sure that your microphones are muted. So here we're going to set the scene. The topics we will be discussing in the next 45 minutes can be really illustrated by this simple pathway at the top. A virus gets into a host, you or me, and causes a disease. Now, what happens, the outcome, whether we recover, yes or no, depends on factors in the virus, the type, the dose, and the virulence, and also in the host, the person, the age, the gender, his immunity, or her immunity, and if there are any background diseases. And the recovery, well, it's like the prayers that we say on the Yom Noraim in Tana Tokef, mi yichya, mi yamut, who will live and who shall die. That will be the outcome. Now, to combat the pandemic, there are two strategies. One is prevention on the left-hand side, masks, social distancing, and we'll talk a little bit of diet and lifestyle, and treatments, antibodies and drugs. But to eradicate the disease, we need vaccines. And then that's a question of somebody's immunity and how long it will last, and we will go into that with Professor Kornberg. So now to business. Now, Professor Kornberg, Roger, I'd like to ask the first question in a traditional manner. Why is this virus different from all other viruses?
Thank you, Elliot. And in order to answer the question, I need first to explain to those who don't recall what is the nature of a virus about its components. And then I will be able to address the question, I hope, in a more understandable way. Viruses, I'm sure many of you know, is the simplest form of life. It consists, in the manner illustrated here for the coronavirus, but equally true of every other virus, of a genome, which may be either DNA or the closely related molecule, virtually identical for our purposes, RNA, surrounded by a shell to protect it from the environment and to enable its delivery to a target. The virus then consists of nothing more than a genome,
Sorry, I can't hear. Roger, I can't hear you.
in the manner referred to as a corona or a set of spikes. Elliot, please, the next slide. A virus is a parasite. A virus cannot multiply, cannot reproduce itself on its own. The sole purpose of a virus, if you will, of organisms in general is reproduction. But for this essential function, a virus must invade a host. In general, a virus will invade a cell. In the particular case of the coronavirus, it invades cells of our respiratory tract. Now, recent studies done during the past year in the course of the epidemic have shown that the viral infection invariably begins in the nasal passages, where the virus invades cells that line the nasal passages. Once the virus enters the cell, it co-opts the machinery of the cell for reproduction. In particular, the virus is able both to reproduce, to multiply, to produce large numbers of its own genome, and using the apparatus of the cell again, to produce many of the proteins needed to encapsulate the virus for its eventual purpose in infecting other cells. A typical virally infected cell will produce thousands, if not millions, of virus particles, and it will ultimately die. The particles that it releases will then invade neighboring cells. In the case of the coronavirus, the infection therefore spreads. It spreads to the lining of the trachea, the lining of the bronchi, which lead from the trachea to the lower airways, the lung, and eventually it often does, invade cells that line the air-filled spaces of the lung itself. In most cases, the infection is confined to the lining of the respiratory tract. In rare cases, due to rupture of that lining, it may actually penetrate into the circulatory system and is believed then to be capable of infecting other organs. The reason for that is because what the virus recognizes on the surface of cells of the respiratory tract is an important protein of our bodies that plays a major role in the control of blood pressure and other functions, which is common to almost all cells of the body. When we are infected by a coronavirus, or indeed many other respiratory viruses, almost the entire lining of our respiratory tract will be destroyed, and time will then be required for its regeneration. Now to the question, why is this virus, or how does it, differ from other viruses? It's interesting to compare it with other coronavirus, such as the first SARS virus and the MERS virus that some of you may know of, which is still abundant in camels in the Middle East, especially in Saudi Arabia, and occasionally transmitted to humans. There are two differences at the level of the disease. It's perhaps worth mentioning that the virus is named SARS, coronavirus, or CoV-2 because it is the second after the first SARS virus. The disease is called COVID-19, as you're well aware. The disease, of course, because it arose in 2019 at the very beginning. The virus differs in two important respects from other coronaviruses. It attaches more tightly, therefore fewer virus particles are needed to initiate an infection. Therefore, the coronavirus is much more contagious than SARS or MERS. On the other hand, and very fortunately for us, it is less dangerous. The fatality rate is much lower. The reasons for that are not precisely known. It may relate to penetration into the circulatory system for infection of other organs. We may not be so lucky next time. There will be future pandemics. Those viruses responsible may also be very contagious, but they may also be more lethal. Elliot, please change the slide.
I'm trying. Hold on. Yes. So,
And Elliot, could you please, as a physician, which I am not, address these important medical issues?
Thank you. So the time it takes after exposure is about 5 to 6 days, with a range of 1 to 14. And now we've reduced the quarantine period here in Israel to 10 days, because then the majority of cases come after that. The symptoms that one is looking out for is fever, cough, and shortness of breath. And that was sort of more conventional on coronavirus. And remember that the common cold is, I think, a coronavirus with over 150 variants. But we've discovered, or through actually citizen science, through social media, new symptoms, in particular the loss of smell and taste, which we weren't aware of. And similarly, and rather unfortunately, we are finding that there are long-term effects of people who have had received the virus and have suffered from the virus, and they're multi-system, involving what's called brain fog, problems with memory and cloudiness. There's myocarditis, infection of the heart, kidney failure, muscle pain, rashes, and depression, changes in mood. And in relation to the symptoms, we want to say something about how long the virus survives on surfaces. I think, Roger, you wanted to say something on that.
The viral, can I be heard, Elliot? Yes.
Yes, now, yes.
Freeze for a moment, sorry. The virus is designed for contagion. The whole purpose of the life cycle of the virus is passage to other infected individuals and multiplication there, and then passage on to other. Is the reason that the virus is rugged, and the reason why the virus does not disappear when it is, as it were, in the wild, no longer protected within an organism, such as in the body of an infected individual, but actually exposed to the environment. And Elliot has noted here what are estimates for how long the virus will survive when contacting a surface, so out in the open and no longer within the bodily fluids of an individual. And what it indicates is that it can be for quite a long time. And bear in mind that what determines the survival of the virus outside of bodily fluid is the rate of drying. The virus will not persist long in the fully desiccated state. Moreover, as indicated here, the virus can be destroyed by disinfectants. And the reason is that the virus is surrounded by a lipid envelope, which means that the virus is like soap. It will also be destroyed by disinfectants that are oxidizing agents, and they will destroy the genome of the virus. Now, this leads naturally to the next slide, Elliot, if you would, please.
And so
Elliot, may I?
Yes, please.
Just one remark. I commented that the virus is produced and then released from cells of the respiratory tract. And that is the reason why the main mode of transmission is by the expulsion of material from our respiratory tract through speech, through coughing and sneezing, and what have you. And the key point that you must bear in mind, while the primary mode of transmission is therefore inhalation of those droplets from speech or coughing or what have you, and thus the benefit of masks, nevertheless, as Elliot has noted, those droplets may fall to a surface, or an infected individual contacting his or her nasal passages and then a surface will spread the disease also in that manner. This is the reason why Elliot has noted the further points on the slide. Elliot, forgive me for interrupting.
No, on the contrary, and that's fine. And then I think we can move on because people want to know really about prevention and treatments, which I think we're going to do with you, Roger.
So in this elegant slide that Elliot has produced with a humorous, as it were, illustration, we return to the important points that Elliot made at the beginning, but which follow now, I think, directly from what we've discussed during only the last few minutes, namely the importance of masks and social distancing. And that is obviously because of the main mode of transmission. In fact, it is my personal opinion that if everyone wore a mask from the outset of the pandemic, it would not have been necessary to lock down at all, and the disease would have been largely contained. It is noteworthy that in, if I'm not mistaken, in Australia, for example, mask wearing to prevent spread of the coronavirus has reduced the annual incidence of influenza to near zero. We may all want to continue wearing masks during the flu season in the future. Elliot will comment later also on the benefits of particular diet and lifestyle. But let me go on now to speak briefly about what to do when the disease strikes before returning to the main means of prevention, which you're doubtless all aware of, and some discussion of the topic of vaccines. I might just mention in passing what I'll repeat later. What vaccines do is elicit an immune response. They prepare us so we are not naive with respect to the virus when it first enters the body, but we're prepared. Prepared by already having made our own antibodies against the virus. It is for that reason that treatment of infected individuals with often large amounts of antibody are beneficial. In fact, more than 100 years ago, when the first forays into what we may call modern medicine were undertaken, noteworthy, I think, that modern medicine is only about 100 years old. One of the early discoveries was the benefit of infusion of an infected individual with plasma from a previously infected human or animal. And that is the reason, that is because of what I have just mentioned, that the infected individual will produce antibodies. Now, I first mentioned that the role of antibodies is to recognize the invader, and in this case, what is exposed on the surface of the virus for recognition, and that is the spike protein that I mentioned before. When a particle, be it a virus, or for that matter, a bacterium or other pathogen, is coated with antibodies, that feature is recognized by cells in our bodies, especially in the circulatory system, but even on the surface of on body surfaces such as the respiratory epithelium, cells which gobble up the antibody-coated particle. That is our main mode of defense against virus particles, bacteria, and other pathogens. Now, the plasma from previously infected individuals, convalescent plasma, is being used today in hospitals to treat patients with COVID-19 and very effectively. But of course, it is in very limited supply. Some years ago, Cesar Milstein and a student of his, George Kohler, discovered how to produce a specific antibody of most of greatest efficacy against a target. Because it is only one antibody and not a mixture, it is called monoclonal. Because it is an antibody chosen for its great efficacy, it is more effective. And because these can be industrially synthesized, industrially produced on a very large scale, they are an important mode of therapy. And some of you will have noticed in the news that the Regeneron company in America has got a regulatory approval for its mixture of, I think, 2 monoclonal antibodies against the spike protein, if I recall correctly, that were used to treat Donald Trump and allow him to return rapidly to campaign and create the problems that arose therefrom. You will also have read that steroid treatment, for example, with dexamethasone, has proved to be helpful. And that is because the steroid combats not the virus itself, not the infection directly, but rather a secondary consequence, which is inflammation that always follows upon the destruction of body tissue. Inflammation following infection can be as or more dangerous than the primary infection itself. And thus the use today in hospitals, I think worldwide, of steroids also for the treatment of disease. Now, there is another important category of treatment that has not really yet seen the kind of use or application to the problem that is possible. And that is drugs. These are typically molecules that are relatively small, that can be swallowed as pills. Heard of remdesivir was developed by the Gilead company for the SARS virus, not for SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID-19. Nevertheless, given the urgency of the situation at the outset, at the beginning of the pandemic, remdesivir was tested and found to be of some use. It is effective, but not as to the extent that one would like. Nevertheless, it is the standard of care today in hospitals around the world, and every patient in America, and I'm sure in Israel, who is hospitalized with the SARS-CoV-2 with COVID-19 disease is treated with remdesivir to ameliorate the symptoms and, one hopes, hasten recovery from the disease. Drugs do not attack the virus particle in the manner that I have described for antibodies. Drugs prevent the production of virus particles by infected cells. Drugs are therefore potentially much more effective because they attack the disease at its source. The most effective drugs for treating viral infection prevent the reproduction, prevent the multiplication of the viral genome. It may interest you that whereas we have antibodies, whereas we have antibiotics to combat bacterial disease, we have almost no such defense despite many years of effort against viral disease. We are all aware of broad-acting antibiotics which have largely eliminated bacterial disease, which used to be the major cause of death. But we are almost defenseless against viral disease because so few drugs have been produced that are effective against viral disease. In fact, the very first drug was produced by a Jewish woman in New York named Gertrude Elliot, for which she won the Nobel Prize, shared with a colleague, Sir Charles Black. And this was a drug for treatment of the herpes virus. And as I say, the first antiviral drug, and it functioned in exactly the manner that I have just mentioned. It prevented the multiplication of the viral genome. Long after that time, through arduous and very long, lengthy efforts in many laboratories and companies, a drug was developed that prevents the multiplication of the hepatitis C virus RNA. And as you know, that now is available as a cure for that infection. With one other exception, we have no other drugs for viral disease. And that is
that means we have to rely on vaccines. We have to think more along the vaccines.
And that is why the effort to make drugs against this disease has been so unsuccessful, and why, as Elliot says, we need vaccines. And that leads us to the next slide. So as I've mentioned, vaccines expose the body to a foreign object against which we respond. Our immune system makes antibodies. And I've told you that the antibodies may be directed against the spike protein. There are being made better, and they are directed against, or they are elicited by introduction in our bodies of either spike protein, which can do us no harm because it is not a virus, or a virus itself, but which has been chemically treated so that it cannot reproduce, cannot enter our cells, an attenuated virus, which is the main type of vaccine that has been made for most diseases in the past, or more recently, a tiny piece of the viral genome that directs the production only of the spike protein, but by our own cells, so that once again, our immune system is confronted with that foreign object and makes antibodies. Thank you, Elliot. Now, you're doubtless aware of by Oxford Institute, which needed to in the production of vaccines. Others by two companies, one in America, Moderna, and the other a collaboration between an American company, Pfizer, and a German company, BioNTech. The Oxford vaccine is similar to what I have mentioned, the traditional type of vaccine based on an attenuated virus, not identical, but similar. The Moderna and Pfizer vaccines take the approach that I alluded to a moment ago of delivering just a piece of the viral genome that directs only the production of the spike protein, but by the cells of our body so that it is available in our system, recognized as a foreign entity, eliciting immune response. I won't comment on the Russian vaccine, about which less information is available.
But the question we all want to know, Roger, is which one would you take? And what are the safety issues?
My answer to that is quite simply, I believe they are all remarkably effective. I believe they are all completely safe. And I would take any one of them. And I will certainly take the first one that is available. And when the distribution, organized in the manner that Elliot will come to later on, is arranged here and it becomes available to me, I will get in line and be eager to receive it.
So that's very important news for everybody, that you will take any of the first three there, and they are safe, and we need to be vaccinated. We'll come a little bit back out there. And you've got another slide, Roger, about the mRNA vaccines in case people had some doubts.
Yes, and I thought it would be very helpful to comment on safety because people have expressed concern about the RNA vaccines, which differ from the traditional kind in as much as they entail the introduction of an RNA molecule into our cells to produce viral protein against which an immune response is mounted in our bodies. Actually, I would rather, if I were concerned, which I am not about the safety of any of these viruses, have the RNA-based vaccine, because the attenuated virus is, after all, a complete virus. And if the chemical treatment didn't really work, which I assure you it does, then I might feel safer with an RNA vaccine. As indicated here, the RNA vaccine consists only of a tiny bit of the viral genome, which encodes only that protein that appears on the surface of the virus, which the body then recognizes as foreign to elicit an immune response. And it's very important to bear in mind that no corners have been cut in the testing for safety. Tens of thousands of people have been treated with mRNA vaccines, and there are no, I repeat, no credible instances of any adverse consequences due to the vaccine. And I think it's important here to reflect on the risk-benefit ratio. If anyone is concerned about vaccination, bear in mind, as Elliot will show later on, that the rate of infection is high if you are not vaccinated. And even if you wear a mask, in the absence of such protection, you will inevitably someday be struck down by this disease. It is impossible to avoid it for a lifetime. There is therefore no alternative but to protect oneself with a vaccine. If the risk factor for, in the absence of a vaccine, is perhaps 10% now and a virtual certainty in the future, the risk factor in the presence of a vaccine is exceedingly small. As you saw, 95% or better protection. And it's very important also to bear in mind, we will be able to determine if your vaccination was successful. I'm involved in the development of a diagnostic method with a company based in California, which is shortly going to distribute, and which will be available in Israel, a device which, by a finger prick test, will be able to inform you not only whether you have gained immunity from vaccination, but what is your level of immunity? What level of antibodies your system has produced directed against the spike protein of the virus that will protect you from its harmful effects. So I emphasize that these vaccines are in principle safe. They have been shown to be safe. That I myself might even prefer one, but I will take whatever is available.
Thank you. Just to complete the picture, what's going on in Israel? Well, certainly we have purchased, as you see, 24 million doses of virus at the top, and we need 2 doses, so it's more than enough to cover the whole country. The actual Israeli, from the Biological Research Institute, it will not be ready. It needs further testing. It's a modified virus, and we probably won't get it to August. So we're going to need to have the other vaccines before then. I just want to say a little bit, again, where Professor Steinberg was meant to come in here. We wish him a refuah shlema that has come down with COVID, but the problems of who should get the vaccines and in what order. Now, on the left, you will see what has been decided in England. In fact, where the old adults and their carers will get #1 priority, but they calculate the NHS and the government briefing, the Department of Health, that only 25% of the most serious vulnerable population, and that covers most of the risk. Now, what's going on in Israel, and Professor Steinberg is on the committee deciding, they haven't come in. We have other things or other groups that we have to decide about. First of all, obviously the health professionals, and the army and the emergency services, which don't appear on the English list. Obviously the elderly, according to their age, vulnerable individuals, with diabetes, heart disease, respiratory disease, or any chronic disease, and then children. So we're waiting to hear, and we should hear, I think within the week or so before we start the vaccinations, what will be the priorities and who will get it first. And as you heard, we should all be getting it. I just really want to tell you something about Israel. And at the top, these are two graphs from a wonderful dashboard from the Ministry of Health that is updated twice a day. On the top, you see the cases. Now, the cases are much more in the young than in the elderly, whereas the mortality is just the opposite, more in the elderly than in the young. And in both, men seem to suffer more than women. And the point being that most of the cases in the young people are asymptomatic. And then if they're not careful with their grandparents and in the elderly, they will pass it on. The situation with regard to the ages, just to show how that pans out on the world data, as you see from the ages of 0 to 9 years or 10 years, there's no fatalities, and then the percent really doesn't start rising till over 60. And that's very important, who should keep careful, should behave carefully. And as Roger said just recently, if everybody wore a mask, then we probably wouldn't have to have these shutdowns. And that's something to think of because of the other economic and social fallouts of it. Now, just have a look at this. These are the cases, and on the left and on the right are the two peaks of when we had the deaths. These data are from a week ago, and we have already gone over the 3,000, the total. But what is interesting, that the positive tests, and you'll see in the top title, about 4% of the population are tested positive. And when they looked at antibodies in October, that's about 5%. So that figures, and that's consistent. In England, the antibody is about 10% of the population. But what the point here is, this is a long way to go from herd immunity when you say, as they want initially in Sweden, that people will get the natural infection, and then the virus itself will die out. You need about 70% of the population to have antibodies, I think, for that to occur. So it doesn't. Now, what happens about these? Just want to show you the number of cases and what happened during the Chagim in Tishrei. And you can see the importance of social responsibility. That if people come together, then there's going to be more infections. And Roger, you were saying something, you were walking near the old city recently or in the last few days, and over Hanukkah,
yes,
you were a little bit shocked.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. My wife Yali and I took a walk in the old city, in the Jewish quarter of the old city, to enjoy the display of Hanukkah lights. And we approached the point overlooking the Kotel, and saw in the yeshiva on what is on the left-hand side, if you face the wall, high above, a large meeting room filled with young men, packed shoulder to shoulder, shouting, singing, with no masks. And we were appalled because, of course, they are not going to die, as Elliot has told you, but they will unavoidably pass the disease to one another, and then to them, but will endanger many rest of the country who are in desperate need of health care, which is in short supply. We were simply appalled. It must not happen. It must.
Well, we've got to do more communications. Thank you. The next thing I want to say is, how does Israel compare to other countries? And here, if the computer will. Here we go. So this is the ranking from last week, and this is by deaths, unfortunately, per million population. And you can see the range is tremendous from nearly 1,500 by now per million to Taiwan, which is a remarkable 0.3, where they learned from the previous SARS epidemic. Now, Israel is in the middle, 49. We're already actually a week later, 55. And everybody is comparing themselves to Sweden, which didn't do any shutdown at all. And you can see that we're having half the mortality. The UK is ahead of the USA, and Spain and Italy and Belgium in Europe really haven't had any luck. It's been a terrible period for them. Just to show what I mentioned about previous underlying diseases, people with heart disease or diabetes, this is the increase in the probability that the infection will be fatal. Of note, and because some people have been gaining weight during the shutdown, obesity is a risk for hospitalization, for poor lung function, and to be on ventilation. Whereas if everybody is fit, then it's only the fatality is 0.9%. However, we don't know if these patients that are recorded here are actually people dying from COVID, or they happen to have it and they don't die from it. And the way we tackle this is by looking at the excess mortality. And here I show the picture, the statistics for Israel, and you can see the greatest increase over, that's 0%, when you compare what has happened in the last 9 months to what happened in the last 5 years. So then you can say if there's excess mortality, it's probably due to COVID. Whereas in the younger age group, it's actually below, and that might be because there's less traffic accidents when we weren't on the roads. But that's the best way, either deaths per million or preferably the excess mortality. And when we look at the figures, and there's always a lag, this is up to September, you see that Israel from that has about a 17% excess mortality, and that's half or just less than half than what was going on in Italy and the UK during this period. The United States at 24%, and Sweden, the test case is 20%. So I just want in the time that remaining just to say a little bit about diet and lifestyle which can strengthen the immune response. And that, of course, is the pet. While we're here in Israel, we've got the Mediterranean diet, and that has been shown, the best scientific evidence, that it does help people with heart disease, with cancer, with neurological disease, Alzheimer and Parkinson's, and it is really also good for giving you the best chance for your immune system to tackle the COVID. The irony is, of course, that Israelis don't eat the Mediterranean diet. Well, we've got wonderful things in Machane Yehuda. So the point I want you to make, it's based on olive oil. That's the connection with Hanukkah, and mainly fruits and vegetables and whole grains. The motto being with little meat, so you should use your forks more than your knives. We would believe in seasonality and, of course, frugality, and use local products. But it's all a question of lifestyle. And to give you something positive to go back to, we have worked out a sort of 10 commandments for this period. The do's being eating fruits and vegetables with different colors, each one. We have the Mediterranean diet, and I've also added, but in another session we could deal with it, the 7 species, fresh fish twice a week. The interesting thing, what has happened with the social aspect, that has come out during COVID, and that has not taken place, and it's not so easy to exercise. The don'ts are fairly obvious. But I just wanted to show you something that, hold on. What the social commentator, a very interesting guy called Niall Ferguson, he's a social and cultural historian, because of the difficulties of socializing, and the lack of getting together, it has changed social relationships, and that's not a good thing. And I think we're here coming up now to summarizing, Roger. So I'm going to put together and see what are the comments of what we think would be the takeaway messages that we want to give you before we get on to some questions. As is apparent, we don't know all about this. It's a new virus and we don't actually know everything about it. There might be some variants, Roger, now, and whether vaccines will have to be done every year like flu, or we saw a mink in there, it made a species jump. So we're not sure. I would say I used to think we were all in the same boat, but obviously from the figures of the mortality per million, we're all in the same storm, but some countries are doing much better than others. So we're in the same storm, we're not in the same boat. Nobody has the right answer. This is the point where when it becomes to the politicians, nobody has all the answers. And I'm much more actually worried about the public health, the psychological and social economic consequences and fallout than the health ones at this time. I'm worried about the tourist industry. I'm worried about the performing arts. I'm worried like the unemployed. We've got a lot to get through here. We mustn't relax our vigilance. Actually, Roger, you when we were talking today, you mentioned Ben Gurion, we will fight the war as though it were no white paper. What did you actually mean by that when you referred to that?
So I think what we have to do quite clearly is, on the one hand, behave as if the disease will never go away, and so not let our guard down, wear masks, practice good hygiene, avoid social contact except absolutely necessary. But on the other hand, take a vaccine as soon as it is made available to you. I think if there's any one statement that would summarize everything that we have discussed this evening, it is simply that. Don't let your guard down now, because the end is near, and it will come when the population is vaccinated, and every one of us should avail ourselves of that at the earliest opportunity. Elliot has tried to be helpful and address concerns you may have by adding a couple of further points. The mention that vaccines have side effects, but bear in mind, those are invariably associated only with the injection itself, and they disappear within a matter of hours or days. There are no long-lasting side effects. Sadly, we live in an age of social media and the internet, which has threatened to destroy democracy and shouldn't at least be allowed to cause us to succumb in this particular instance. You cannot believe what you read about the supposed dangers of this vaccine, or, if you will, vaccines in general. There are very rare instances with some vaccines of possible deleterious consequences, but very rare. And it comes back to the risk-benefit analysis that I mentioned before. Would you rather take a 1 in 10 chance of dying of the disease, or a 1 in a million chance of an adverse effect of a vaccine? It's really so simple.
Yes, right. So we've come to, I couldn't resist giving you this last slide made by a brilliant librarian before we have a few questions. What he or she has done is arranged the books on the left-hand side to say the following little story. The English patient had caught it on the beach. I should have stayed at home, she said. Now she was in quarantine in the dark house of splendid isolation. Still, hope springs eternal. With a little luck, common sense, and personal hygiene, the Corona Book of Horror Stories, which is here, the Corona Book of Horror Stories must end soon. Always remember, clean hands save lives, and when in doubt, don't go out. So I'm now going to stop. By the way, if there are questions, I'm going to take them, but this is the email, and we will get this to you. I'm going to stop the screen sharing now, and let's see what on the chats we have to. And we have some questions, Roger. How long will the antibodies produced by the vaccine remain active or effective?
So antibodies in general remain active for many months. It is, but the immune response lasts longer because although the antibodies themselves may disappear, new antibodies are produced. That sustains immunity. And finally, the cells that secrete the antibodies themselves remain forever in our system. And so when we are those cells more to secrete antibodies. Now, the problem with, for example, the lack of duration of an influenza vaccine, and the reason why we have to do it each year, is not because of a deficiency of our immune system, which is capable of everything I just described. It is because the virus changes its coat. The, so to speak, spike protein, or the equivalent in the influenza virus, has the ingenious capacity of completely transforming itself so that in the next season, it is no longer recognized by the antibodies that were elicited in the previous one or that were produced in response to the previous vaccine. We do not yet know.
That's right. We don't know if this is going to happen with the COVID.
Know what's going to happen. But let me assure you that we will be much better prepared. In the first place, because we will be able rapidly to produce an mRNA vaccine, and I mean rapidly, only by changing that small piece of viral genome to the one that represents the new virus. The second point, and not less important, we will have drugs. And I might mention, without naming the name so as appearing to have a conflict of interest, that I direct science at a company in Rehovot, and well, mainly based actually in Petah Tikva, where we are producing a novel kind of drug, which will not only be effective against the SARS-CoV-2, the cause of COVID-19, it will have two other important attributes. The first, just like what I've mentioned about RNA vaccines, it also can be changed within a matter of hours to confront any new virus or any other virus.
Right.
Anticipate what we will produce will be drugs for every one of the 23 common human respiratory viruses.
Oh, amen. That would be good. Two little other questions. Someone who has contracted, already has the disease, should he be vaccinated, who's been through COVID?
The simplest answer to that would come from the diagnostic test that I mentioned.
Do the antibodies?
We will have the capacity, that the device that we are making in California, which will be available here, and first available here.
So that will depend on the antibody. The other question, Roger, once a person has received 2 doses, is it safe to travel, or must you still, after you've been vaccinated, can you travel, and do you need to wear a mask?
So I believe on the one hand that once you have 2 doses, you're almost certainly safe, especially if you have been tested and shown to have responded, to have the vaccine has elicited a very effective immune response in your system. I myself, in the future, will wear masks, not only to have double protection, but because of what I told you before. And that way I will not catch a cold on the airplane either.
And one, I think, last question. Somebody asks, when is it safe to go inside to get together with people to socialize? At what stage after the vaccination will we be able to go back to the synagogue or go back to concerts and things like that?
So you may have read in the newspaper that there will be green passports. It will be possible for people to enter synagogue.
Yeah, frozen. We've frozen.
Yeah, we froze. I don't know if
Yeah.
my remark was complete.
No, perhaps could you just repeat that about we're going to get a passport and then we will be able to.
I am sure that the government of Israel will devise a system which are now being created in companies both in Israel and elsewhere, and I'm sure it'll be done here, that will enable one to provide on one's cell phone or what have you, proof of vaccination or what have you, to assure the fellow participants in any social event that it is safe to congregate.
Well, that's fine. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Professor Kornberg. We are actually on the hour. I want to thank you for your participation. I want to thank our audience also from near and far, from Israel and abroad. I want to thank in particular Rav Ott for his words, and Menachem Levinsky, the eminence grise, the power behind the throne, the person organizing everything. And thank you so much for helping out with all this and doing it.
And thank you,
Roger.
Thank you,
אליוט ורוג'ר, אני רוצה להודות לכם מאוד מאוד על הערב המאלף הזה, ואני אומר את זה בעברית, שגם יבינו בעברית קצת. היה פשוט מדהים ונפלא, ותודה רבה לכם, ולמדתי, ולמדנו כולם הרבה מאוד, ואני מתכוון להיות בין הראשונים שילכו לקחת את החיסון, לאחר מה ששמעתי.
יפה.
אני אהיה דוגמה לבית הכנסת. תודה רבה לכולם, ולילה טוב, ותודה רבה שהשתתפתם. האירוע הבא בעוד חודש בעזרת השם.
תודה רבה.
נודיע לכם, נעדכן אתכם. לילה טוב לכולם,
לילה
תודה רבה.
לילה טוב.
תודה רוג'ר, thank you so much, and אליוט, תודה רבה.
השם כוחכם, תודה רבה.
ביי ביי.
Bye. Thank you.